Hello and welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. We're so glad that you are joining us today. I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Scott Melson. Hello, sir.
What's up, dude?
Not much. Thanks again for letting me into your home to record today. Bailey is out of town this week, so it's just Scott and I again. And apparently the nice weather was more desirable to the several guests that we invited. They all had other plans this week, which I can't say I blame them. Nonetheless, it's been a slightly less like roller coaster of a week.
Yeah, less frenetic.
Yes. But certainly no less important. So today we're going to talk about a few of the issues dealing with Oklahoma politics and government, as we are wont to do on this show. Scott, first of all, how are you?
I'm well, man. I'm enjoying this weather. The weather the last couple of days has been just remarkable. It's been wonderful. Gonna get some storms tonight, it looks like, or some rain over the next couple of days, which will be good. We still need some more soaking rain here in central Oklahoma. So.
We do. I put out some grass seed today and did a little raking of thatch. So
Nice.
I'm hoping that we get rain. Otherwise, the last time we were supposed to get rain, we didn't. It just spit on my yard and that was it.
Yep.
Made my car very dirty.
Yep. Hopefully we'll get some decent rain this week. I am hoping the nice weather continues. I haven't looked at the weather for next weekend, but I have some power washing on the agenda for next weekend.
Did you buy a power washer or do you rent one?
So I own a power washer. It is not a big industrial gas power washer. I bought one that was on sale on Amazon for very low money. It's an electric. It's pretty low power, but it does what I need it to do.
Okay, how many PSI?
1,500, I think.
That's so. This week there was a sale on Amazon on power washers that are electric, about 1,500 PSI.
Yeah.
And I almost bought one. I was like, well, I think Scott has one. I could borrow his. I also am curious which one he has. So
I can send it to you. It was on sale on Amazon. Here's the deal. If you're like me and you bust it out, twice a year for your front porch, deck, if you have one, that kind of thing, it's fine. If you are someone who needs a power washer on the regular, this is not one that I would recommend.
Right. My understanding is that a good power washer, you're looking at the 2,500 to 3,000 PSI.
Yeah.
However, that's also dangerous territory.
Right.
That'll puncture your skin.
Yes. Yes. This is, I will basically what I'll do is I've got some biodegradable, all natural, wood, cleaner. I will take that and put it in a bucket. I'll scrub my deck down. I'll scrub it with a hard bristle brush, and then I'll power wash it, and then that'll be good for another year.
Do you re-stain afterwards?
I don't, only because I don't want to.
That's fair. That's fair.
I've thought about doing it. You certainly can make a case for restaining and sealing your deck every year.
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, and it's not work that I particularly enjoy. So
that's fair.
I don't.
That's I'm building a piece of furniture for my father-in-law right now, and I'm at the sanding and staining. I've stained it once. You got to sand it, restain it, and it's just not exciting, right? I got to get a good podcast in to listen to. Maybe some of our listeners are doing work around their house right now while they're listening to us talk about doing work around the house. That's a little bit meta.
Or something.
I can also hear the voice of some of our other listeners right now just looking at their radios and saying, get on with it, guys. Enough with the power washing. I feel like Melanie's one of those people who's like, all right, move on. All right.
Start listening at 15 minutes and 32 seconds when they start talking.
That's right. Our other listener, besides her, is thoroughly entertained. All right, well, Scott, let's start by talking about the Loft meeting this week. Right? That's the Legislative Oversight of Fiscal Transparency. That's roughly what it stands for. So it's essentially it's a state agency, right? It's a department, but it's staffed by legislators And this week they heard from the Oklahoma Tourism and Recreation Department, from their director, about a report that had, I think, come out the same week about the tourism department spending like $16 million on renovations and opening new restaurants at all the state parks. But all of this money went to one company, went to Swadley's Barbecue.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was $13 million.
13, excuse me.
$13 million. And they paid Swadley's to operate Swadley's Foggy Bottom kitchen restaurants in Oklahoma State parks. That $13 million includes $2.1 million to cover the restaurant's operating losses for 2021. So the restaurants lost $2.1 million, and they gave it to them.
They got the money anyway.
Yeah.
So let's back up right quick to like just refresh
How
listeners.
did we get here?
Yeah, how do we get here? Right. I mean, we all know, well, about 2 years ago, there was a pandemic that happened, right? It's still happening. I guess about 2 years ago, the pandemic started. And during those 2 years, there's been a lot of work going on to renovate our state parks, which is good. A lot of folks are going outside. Tourism's a big deal. This is work that needed to be done. But, as we all know, the restaurant industry has not fared well over the last couple of years, right? It is very difficult to open new restaurants in the midst of a pandemic, especially at state parks that people may not know have been renovated, right? They were in disrepair. And so they opened several state parks, or several restaurants in several state parks. I forget how many, 4 or 5 or 6, right? And they didn't even brand it as Swadley's Barbecue. They branded him as Foggy Bottom. So like, I think you're missing out on some brand identity there.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you. I assume some people go to state parks for like catered meals or eat at the restaurant there, but that is not why I have ever gone to a state park.
I literally don't know a single person who has ever gone to a state park to go to the restaurant.
No.
I mean, like, maybe there's like a really famous one. I mean, like, there's Central Park in New York, which is not a state park, it's a city park. But like, there are some fantastic restaurants in and around Central Park. So people go to those, but I don't feel like that's the same as saying, like, I'm going to go to Beaver's Bend to eat at Swadley's Foggy Bottom.
No, I go to state parks frequently. I was at Red Rock Canyon State
I saw
Park.
that with the kids last weekend.
Yeah, like a week ago for my birthday. We went for a hike. We did not go in any building, right? I don't know that they have a restaurant. I would assume they do, but we brought our own food. Like, that's why you go. It's a picnic. But I can see, I've been to some state parks. They have a nice lodge. Maybe you're bringing some people there to have a catered meal. That can make sense, right? If you're hosting an event there. But
Medicine Park has some nice places.
Yeah, sure. But again, I feel like this is a small niche of like restaurants that probably shouldn't be spending a lot on like fancy meals because they're probably not driving that kind of clientele.
Yeah.
And yet, we gave them $13 million. And my understanding, Scott, is that all the money went to Swadley's.
Yes.
So, and there was no competitive bidding process.
Well, so Jerry Winchester says that 25 possible operators were approached for the contract, and Swadley's was the only one willing to pursue it.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, so this is what Jerry Winchester. He's the executive director for the state Oklahoma Department of Tourism and Recreation. He, like many of the governor's appointees, he is not a career civil servant. He's a former oil and gas executive that Governor Stitt hired to lead the agency in 2019. And like many of Governor Stitt's appointees, has found himself in legal trouble shortly after taking the job. But
but he said, right, that like the problem was it was hard to find other companies who were willing to operate restaurants in such remote locations, which should be a red flag about how successful they might be.
Right. But Representative Ryan Martinez, who's a Republican of Edmond, and this is a quote. By the way, NonDoc has a fantastic article about this. So as per usual, if you are looking for great local journalism covering everything at the Capitol and a lot of things going around our fair state. Be sure to check out the folks at Non-Doc. They do a great job. Non-Doc has a quote from Representative Martinez that says, quote, "You're telling me this offer was made to all kinds of restaurants and vendors saying, hey, open this operation. It doesn't matter how you perform, how much food you sell, you're going to have your losses covered," and people weren't lining up to take that deal.
Right.
I mean, especially because like you mentioned, so the last couple of years have not been great for restaurants, right? Like the pandemic has not been good to the restaurant industry. And you're saying like, here's a deal where you're going to get paid whether you sell food or not. And like people weren't going to take it. I mean, that does seem fishy.
It does. And, as they like had this discussion during the loft meeting, somebody, I think it was Martinez, said criminal investigations exceed loft's authority. If we were to discover potential criminal activity, our internal procedures would require that we inform the proper authorities. Dun dun dun.
Yeah, so that's Jackson, who's the director of Mike Jackson, who's the director of Loft, in response to Representative Martinez saying, "Hey, did somebody break the law here?" And Director Jackson says, "Look, it's not our job to determine if somebody broke the law, and if we found something that looks like somebody broke the law, we would tell law enforcement, and then law enforcement would take over from there." As it happens, shortly after that, the OSBI announced that they're opening a criminal investigation. They're opening a criminal investigation into the state park expenditures that were highlighted in the Loft report. This investigation will be taking place at the request of District Attorney David Prater.
Because he's the DA for the district where it's being filed, right?
Yes.
So I think, what's interesting here is that, Jerry Winchester, I don't know him. I'm sure he's a nice guy, but, the director of the tourism department, it was like, hey, people don't have any perspective on what this used to look like. Like, we spent a lot of money, yes, but you don't know how bad it was, which is true. But Scott, I think my gut says, or I don't know if it says, it wonders if maybe they overshot, right? Like they didn't really do a customer analysis for what customers of the state parks are looking for. Maybe they did, but it just seems like the amount of money they spent and what they were delivering exceeds what the demand is.
Yeah, and it's just, and even going beyond the Foggy Bottom deal, there's the Loft, the Legislative Office of Fiscal Transparency looked at this department's budget and really had serious questions about all of their accounting. So, they estimated their maintenance funding by taking 4% of the replacement value of all park assets, which apparently is like pretty high on the high end, maybe even above what would be a standard accounting practice. And Mr. Winchester defended that by saying, "Well, that's what we did when I was at Chesapeake, so I thought that was okay." He's been in literally. He was executive at He was at 77 Energy and Chesapeake Oilfield Services, and he said that was the number we used annually as a percentage of our assets. And he's talking about drilling rigs or fracking equipment. But that's not the same.
Well,
right?
And it didn't work out particularly well.
Right.
For those companies.
Right. And then they also, just the way they have assigned value to their assets. So boat ramps, right? Every boat ramp was valued at $14,650, whether it's a large boat ramp or a small boat ramp, right? The lodges at Quartz Mountain and Roman Nose were both valued at $19.5 million, even though the Quartz Mountain Lodge has 120 rooms and the Roman Nose Lodge has 22 rooms. They were both valued at $19.45 million. And so it's just a very, So
the total amount might be accurate, but they did some corner cutting on the way to get there.
That's
or at least questionable.
I'm not an accountant, but the people that are accountants that looked at this seemed to have a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Including the state legislatures, whose job it is to oversee all of this. So we'll see what happens. Moving forward at the Oklahoma Tourism and Recreation Department.
Well, it has been interesting, Scott, I think, too, because Lieutenant Governor Matt Pinnell, who we've had on the show a couple of times, I think, part of the lieutenant governor's job really is to promote Oklahoma tourism. I mean, he's been very active in this.
Yes.
And when we first had the loft meeting, I don't think he was there. You didn't really hear his name mentioned, but he was at this meeting the other day that was like a tourism department meeting, basically. And he said he wants to promote renovations to state parks, which he thinks will be a boost to the local economy. And again, having frequented our state parks myself, I can say that yes, the conditions definitely needed to have some renewal, right? Like they were dilapidated. The cabins were not what they used to be. And even like, I probably go to Roman Nose the most because it's pretty close to Oklahoma City there and like Lake Eufaula State Park. But even at Roman Nose, over the last, 6 years, like that I've gone camping out there a few times, like I've noticed like a decline in the conditions out there, which is sad because it is a pretty cool park.
Yeah,
that one has like
park.
a bunch of cool stuff there. And so
some great trails out there.
There are. And like, they had the meeting at Robbers Cave, which is down southeast part of the state and probably my favorite state park of the ones I've been to.
Robbers Cave is very cool.
But the trail is terribly marked. Like there are arrows pointing conflicting directions on the same trail. And it was, the last time I was there was probably in 2015 or late, 2016. And it was really hard to find your way to the cave. And I was like, I've been here before and I'm sure it's not this way, but this little orange arrow. And I like touched it and it like would spin around on its tack. Great. And I was like, oh, this is like a cartoon arrow, right? Like, yeah. So this is very interesting now that it's in the hands of OSBI, right? And I think it's interesting that they said, well, we can't investigate ourselves. If we found anything, we'd kick it over to law enforcement. And then literally like 2 hours later, OSBI is like, well, by the way.
As it turns out.
Yeah.
We will, yes.
Investigating.
Yes.
We'll see. We'll see if this, I hope not, right? Like I'm just sick, Scott, I'll be honest, I'm sick of talking about instances of Oklahoma taxpayer money being misspent.
Right. Well, I mean, like another great example, we don't have to get a ton into this, but like another great example is the pandemic center, right? Like moving the state health lab to Stillwater and the creation of this Oklahoma, Center for Pandemic Excellence, right?
Right.
We've spent like $30 million on this thing. And so far, they don't appear to be doing anything. You know how many variant tests the Oklahoma Center for Pandemic Excellence has conducted?
Less than 10 or something, right?
Zero. Yeah. Zero. You know who is the last in the country for testing for variants of Omicron? The Oklahoma Center for Pandemic Excellence, right? Like
they've been outsourcing everything.
Right. They're paying all kinds of money to like management companies and executives. I mean, it just reeks of incompetence at best and grift at worst, right?
Yeah.
It's we give the governor a hard time on the show, mostly because I think he's terrible at his job. But like, you don't want to see like corruption, right? Like
you don't want to see corruption, and I think as I've said before, nobody wants to pay any more taxes than they have to, but they also want to know they're getting a return on their investment.
I'm saying.
And I don't have any problem paying my state taxes if I felt like it's being used for the good of our state and not just the good of a few people or a few corporations.
Right. Exactly. I mean, you're talking about taxes. One of the things we have on our list to talk about today. We can segue right here.
Yeah.
We discussed earlier this year. You asked me, I think, are they going to cut taxes? And I was like, dude, come on. Of course they're going to cut taxes.
It's an election year.
Do you know what dollar amount legislators in the House have proposed in tax cuts?
I'm going to guess it's in the neighborhood of $600 million.
$500 million.
Hey.
So the House has proposed $500 million in tax cuts. We've got let's see here. First, we've got House Bill 3349 by Speaker McCall. Is a two-year kind of experiment to see what happens if you eliminate the state sales tax on groceries. House Bill 3350, also by McCall, is a permanent tax cut bill. It's a 1/4 point reduction in income taxes across all tax brackets. That's $225 million. We've also got, let's see here, House Joint Resolution 1047 by Representative Manger. This is a proposed constitutional amendment that would freeze valuations for property tax purposes on households headed by those 65 and older. So their property could still appreciate, but the value for tax purposes would be frozen.
My father-in-law would appreciate that for sure.
I mean, I think everybody over 65 would probably appreciate that. But I mean, that's 500 million in tax cut bills. Now, I don't know if any of those are going to go anywhere. Senator Roger Thompson, who is chair of appropriations on the Senate side, as well as Representative Wallace. I was starting to say Watson, and I was like, it's not Watson, it's Wallace. Representative Wallace, who's the chair on the House side. Neither of them seem to have much of an appetite for the tax cuts, actually. They gave an interview to the Tulsa World this week in which they said, we've done some tax cuts, we've done some good work. We know we got a big surplus this year, but we also know a lot of that's one-time funds. Let's maybe kind of see how everything shakes out in the next couple of years. And if the economy keeps, doing well, we can take a look at tax cuts again here in a couple of years. I do think that, as much as many of the members, I think, want to cut taxes, I refuse to use the term tax relief. As much as many of the members want to cut taxes, I do think, particularly in the senior ranks, there are some memories of $1 billion shortfall a couple of years ago, and the massive lift that was required to raise taxes on oil and gas, tobacco.
Well, so that's the problem, right? Is that it's easy to cut taxes and really hard to raise them back. And there's a big difference here, right? These are tax reductions that would be in place in perpetuity. These are not like or 2 years or whatever, but it's not like a one-time.
Yeah.
Here's, everyone gets $100, but this is like reducing the tax rate for a period of time. It tends, if you cut it once, it tends to be made permanent, and then it is exceptionally difficult to get it back in there. And that means that what's happened in the past is that we have a reduction in future income, right? Like it's cutting off our nose to spite our face, right? Financially speaking.
Well, and they're debating this. It blows my mind. It blows my mind that we still have to have this discussion, right? So 3350, which is one of McCall's bills, this is the quarter-point reduction in all tax brackets. Jeff Boatman, who's a Republican out of Tulsa, he's the one carrying the bill in the House. He says, doesn't matter, that it'll pay for itself, right? Like that's what the conservative line is on tax cuts. They always pay for themselves. He said the lost revenue will quickly be made up, and do you know what his proof was?
Did he say how?
Yeah, his proof was, he said, look at 1997 compared to 2020. The state of Oklahoma collected about twice as much income and as much revenue in income tax in 2020 as it did in 1997. And taxes are much, much lower now than they were in 1997. So, ergo, tax cuts pay for themselves.
That's not how it works. That's not how it works at all.
Where do you start? Not talking about inflation, not talking about changes in population.
Right. Right. Also, in 1997, a gallon of gas was 98 cents.
Mm-hmm. I think it might have been less than that, actually.
It was. I mean, there was a point that it hit like 87 cents down in Central Texas. Like, I was in high school started driving about in 97, and like, gas was a big deal. That was my primary expense, right?
The lowest I ever paid for a gallon of gas was 89 cents.
Mm-hmm.
This would have been probably junior year of high school.
So around the same time?
Yeah, I mean...
a little bit later than for you.
It was about 2000, 99 maybe.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, and I remember, because I drove a 1994 Mazda B3000.
Yeah.
And I want to say it had a 15-gallon tank, and I could fill up my truck for $13.
Yeah, that's right. That's funny. My dad drove a Mazda B3000 around the same time. Was that your first car?
It was. It was a great little truck, man.
It was good. What color was yours?
Hunter green.
Oh yeah. My dad's Mazda was white, but he later had a Ford Ranger that was that hunter green.
Yeah.
And as listeners may not know, the Ford Ranger and the Mazda B3000
Same
are
truck.
the same truck. In fact, if you look at the engine block inside the Mazda, it says RNGR for Ranger. That's same thing.
Same truck. And was your dad's a standard?
Yeah.
Oh man,
That's the standard I learned.
Yeah.
Well, that and a Willys Jeep is how I learned to drive a stick.
How did your dad teach you how to drive the stick?
A little bit. So growing up, my one of my buddies' dad and grandpa were really into like World War II history, and so they had some like Willys Jeeps, like the precursor to the Jeep Wrangler, right? Yeah. And we used to drive those around the pasture when I lived up in Minnesota. But as far as modern vehicles go, with a clutch that worked, yes, the Mazda was the test.
My dad taught me how to drive a standard in that Mazda truck, and I had already done like driver's ed and whatnot, so I was fine in terms of driving. But I was about to turn 16, and that was going to be my car, so I needed to be able to drive the stick. And we were at the parking lot at Hafer Park, up in Edmond, and went around the parking lot a few times. And then my dad was just like, "All right, drive us home." Yep. So we did.
That's how you learn.
Well, and then we pulled up to the intersection at 15th and Bryant, headed south on Bryant. It's a little bit of a hill, not too steep, a little bit of a hill. And car pulled up behind us.
Yeah, panic.
Oh yeah, and I told my dad, I'm like, "What happens if I roll back?" And my dad didn't even look at me. He was like, "That'd be bad.
Yeah,
probably shouldn't do that.
Don't do that." Yeah, exactly.
So I probably gave it a little bit more gas than it needed, but I for sure
I'll peel out. That's it.
I for sure wasn't gonna roll backwards.
Yep, 100%. My dad and I had a few test drives around Austin, and then probably my senior year of high school, I was going to go visit my grandma. It was about a 4-hour drive from Austin to East Texas.
Sure.
And my first car was a 1984 Pontiac Bonneville.
Nice.
That I got from my grandparents.
Sure.
And when I got it, it had 178,000 miles on it. Still blew cold AC, still worked, but it had that Chevy small block V8, the 305. And I got 12 miles to the gallon everywhere. City, highway, didn't matter. 12 miles to the gallon. But I didn't think it would make the trip to my grandma's house and back, it broke down a lot.
Sure.
A lot of parking lot repairs. So my dad let me take his Mazda truck, and my girlfriend and I drove up there. And I was like, sure, I've barely driven on a parking lot. Why shouldn't I go on a 4-hour, 200-mile drive? I mean, mostly highway, it was fine, but...
And you did great, didn't you?
I mean, we made it back. The clutch still worked. So, it worked out.
Well, all that to say, the point of that conversation is that you can't compare 1997 and 220 and just be like, no, 2020. Like, look,
a few things have changed.
Income tax rates were lower in 97 and the state collected more money in 2020. See, it works. Like, it blows my, like, you can have a legitimate debate about whether or not you should cut taxes for the economy and like whether it's good policy. But like, I just wish we could have that debate honestly instead of continuing with this charade of like tax cuts pay for themselves. Like, it doesn't work. It's never worked. It doesn't work at the federal level. It doesn't work at the state level. That doesn't mean that like you can have infinitely high tax rates with no economic repercussions. That's not what I'm saying. But you also can't have infinitely low tax rates with no economic repercussions. Like, there's a balance that has to be struck, and that balance depends on a lot of factors, not the least of which is what's happening in the macroeconomy at any given point in time. And like, if we're going to have a discussion about whether or not we should cut taxes or raise taxes, which by the way should always be part of the discussion too, like what the tax rate should be is not, like the default is not that it should always be lower, right? Like there are times when the tax rate should be higher than what it is. I just wish that we could have
like an
honest conversation.
Because sometimes it makes me mad because it feels like politicians they pander to voters, right? They don't believe that voters are smart, that voters would understand nuance. I'm like, it's not nuanced. It's like, hey, listen, the world costs more now than it did in 1997. We need more money for it now than we did in 1997. And that's not hard to understand.
Also, we have a lot more people.
We have more people, right?
Right? We have a lot more people than we did in 1997.
And OK Policy does a good job of framing these conversations in terms of like revenue per person, right? Or cost, like how much we spend per person.
And you have to adjust for inflation.
Right.
Right? Like,
I'm saying things cost more. Go to the gas pump today. You might have noticed it's more than 87 cents. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a big deal. You know, I don't know how to segue from this, but I'm going to jump to another topic, and that is education. I guess I'm thinking about voters here. That's my segue. Speaking of voters, 538 Politics, which I think many listeners, both of our listeners may know that you and I are big fans.
aficionados
Of the 538 in general, but also their politics podcast. It's honestly one of the like 3 podcasts I listen to every week, or try to. And this last week, their episode that came out, I think on April 1st, is about how education became today's wedge issue. And they had 2 political scientists, Sunshine Hillegas, who's from Duke, I think, and Patrick Egan, who's from NYU. So 2 very different states and kind of very different academic experiences. And they talked about just wedge issues in general, but specifically how the parties, the Republican Party and Democratic Party, are divided between each other and within themselves, right? Like where the lines are about this issue of education. They also talk about immigration and some other things. And I couldn't help think about it without thinking about Oklahoma, right? So Scott, certainly for the gubernatorial election, right? We've got Governor Stitt, who has been in many ways openly hostile towards public schools, right?
That's putting, I guess it's not putting it generously. That's probably a fit, but openly hostile is fair.
I mean, not all the time, except for Tulsa public schools. Like he had a full-on spat with them for a while, right? Like it was like pretty overt.
Well, because they believe in COVID, like that it's real,
right?
And that it affects children,
right? So you
can take precautions to prevent it.
You have Governor Stitt and how he's tried to, in some ways, overreach his authority, but like mandating things to schools rather than leaving it up to locally elected school boards and the administrators there. And then the flip side of that is, you know, his likely opponent from the Democratic Party is Joy Hoffmeister, who is the current state school superintendent, right? We've seen the previous teacher of the year for the state, like recently entered, filed to run for office. So you start seeing like education again come up even in our state. That's my point, right? Is that we know it's a wedge issue. We see it every day in the news. And so I'm bringing this up, 1, so we can talk about it, and 2, so that listeners will go listen after they finish this episode, go listen to the 538 episode, which I will link to in the show notes. It's also on YouTube if you want to watch a podcast. We don't do that anymore because no one ever watched them, but
we did. Even our 2 listeners didn't watch.
That's right, yeah. So maybe we'll do that again someday. But anyway, you should definitely listen to the 538 Politics podcast about education as a wedge issue. Scott, I guess my question to you is, do you think that education is truly a wedge issue in Oklahoma politics?
I'm going to do like a Bill Clinton here. It depends on what the meaning of is, right? Like it depends on what you mean by education, right? Uh-huh. I think that education has become a proxy for so-called parental rights. And I think because of that, it becomes a wedge issue, right? Uh-huh. When people are talking about education now, I think what they're often meaning, particularly on the right, is that if I am a parent, that means that I know what is best for my child, and that means that I should be in charge of deciding what my child is or is not exposed to at school, what they do and don't learn about at school, what is and is not appropriate for a child of my age, or a child of my child's age or gender or belief system or whatever. And so, to me, that's what the wedge issue has become, right? As opposed to like, I don't think that whether charter schools versus public schools versus parochial schools, I don't think that that's a wedge issue here, right? I mean, public schools seem to have pretty strong support in Oklahoma. I mean, even if you just look at the recent debate in the Senate about the voucher bill, like the fact that the voucher bill couldn't get out of the Senate despite being supported by the pro tem and the governor.
Right, but think about how close that vote was and how divisive that issue is.
Sure.
It's not like everyone's aligned on one side or the other.
I mean, so maybe. But when I think about the fight in education right now, I'm thinking about the school board races that you're seeing in Edmond or Broken Arrow or Norman or whatever. I'm thinking about, the straw man argument of critical race theory. I'm thinking about the straw man argument of, gender roles, being discussed or taught or whatever framing you want to use.
But that's all education. That's what I'm saying. Like,
well, then yes, education's a wedge issue.
I mean, if a wedge issue, right, is like an issue that a candidate or party uses in hopes of like attracting or alienating voters, right, or supporters, right?
Sure.
Then like 100%, I think it's like it is the quintessential wedge issue of our time, which is what they're talking about on the podcast. But I mean, it's in Oklahoma in particular right now, COVID is almost passé. Like, it's not as big of an issue. No one wants to talk about it anymore. And so that leaves education. That leaves, you would think ethics and corruption is a perennial one, but it doesn't seem to be as much as I think it should be. And then so you get like taxes, education, and maybe abortion, but like, with a state that has super majorities control, like almost all those candidates, you just kind of know that party affiliation aligns you on one side or the other.
I am of the belief that because I think there is a lot of, I think a lot of people assume that in the next 3 months, the Supreme Court is going to, if they don't outright overturn Roe, they're going to effectively overturn Roe.
Right.
And so I think that there is... I think that part of this, let me back up first. Yes, if we're covering all those things under the umbrella of education, then yes, education's a wedge issue. I hesitate to do that because I think so many of that's, I think CRT is a straw man. I think,
yes, it is, but it doesn't mean that it's not a wedge issue, right? It's not.
Yeah, I am reluctant. I feel like I guess in my head, by saying that's like education, I feel like that's almost like buying into the bullshit, right?
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Oh, acknowledging.
Right. Like to me, that's like, no, we're not talking about education. We're talking about a made up thing that you're using to like garner votes. We're not actually talking about education.
Imaginary boogeyman.
Right. Well, but I think that the reason that there is that imaginary boogeyman is because many people on the left and the right are convinced that Roe will not be the law of the land in the next 3 to 4 months when the Supreme Court overturns it or effectively overturns it. Abortion will be essentially outlawed in places like Oklahoma, which begs the question, you're the platform caucus, you're the Republican Party in Oklahoma. What do you run on now, right? Like, that's been the defining issue now. That's been the quintessential, right? Like, Governor Stitt says, I'm going to sign every piece of pro-life legislation that comes across my desk. All right, fine. You've done it. Abortion's outlawed. Now what?
Right.
What's next?
Right.
They have to have something, and you can only cut taxes so far, right?
Right.
And in my opinion, you've got several folks that have been pointing out that this Oklahoma turnaround or whatever, the GOP has been in control of Oklahoma for 14 years now, right? Like sole control for 14 years. So are we still going to say that the problems that, right?
Right.
So you can either talk about why we're still last and everything.
Right.
Or you can talk about abortion, and if abortion's gone, then you got to talk about something else.
Education.
Right.
I mean, and I think to me, it's also because it is not as clearly defined by party affiliation like abortion is, right? I don't know of any pro-choice Republicans that are in the Oklahoma legislature. I do know of at least one like pro-life Democrat, so it's not 100%, but it's pretty close to just.
I know several privately pro-choice Republicans. I don't know any publicly pro-choice Republicans.
Right. And that's what matters here, right?
Right.
How are the votes coming down? But with education, we see people that are willing to stand up to members of their own party that are in positions of authority. And it is, I think, an issue that causes people to fall to one side or the other. And I think to your point, there's some like sub wedges, right? That like cross-cut in different ways, right? So if you're talking about the issue of public education funding versus vouchers, that's one thing. CRT is a separate thing, and maybe there's gradients here. But I think it really is an important wedge issue. So, on a related note, I was out of town this weekend and went to Texas, and on my way back, we were coming up Highway 69. Out of East Texas there. So came up through Durant, right? And drove right by the new Choctaw Nation, like near their headquarters and their big casino and resort. I hadn't seen it.
I've heard it's awesome.
It was huge. My wife was like, what is that? And I was like, I'm pretty sure that's the Choctaw's new casino. It's huge. And that is the heart of their tribal area, right? And their headquarters are there. And I'm saying all this to say they have billboards, and they had some really, I thought, good, strong messaging on education that said like, and I forget the exact wording. I was driving, so I couldn't take a photo, but it was something along the lines of like, we're making students excited to learn, like, or we're building excitement about learning. And I was like, that is framing that everyone is behind, right? I mean, tell me, as a parent of public school children myself, I can't think of any parent I know who is not excited for their kids to learn, and who doesn't want their kids to be excited to learn. Like, that is universally supported messaging. And I thought, oh, that's really good job, Choctaw Nation. I pointed it out. My wife didn't understand what I was gesturing towards, but I thought it's a really good billboard.
Beautiful.
One other thing, speaking of education, Scott, that we saw this week from the Tulsa World, the governor, I'm just going to read the headline because the Tulsa World just said it factually, but it kind of struck me as like so openly factual. It was unusual for a newspaper headline, right? It says, Governor Stitt taps businessman with no college degree for board overseeing higher education.
That was funny.
I was like, oh, they're just calling it out, right? So the guy, Dustin Hillary, said he's a managing partner of Lawton's Hillary Communications. He said in an email that he attended Cameron University for nearly 3 years until the growth of his family business put him neck deep in the business for quicker than anticipated. And so he basically left college early to go to work. Now, you and I both know tons of people who are in similar boats, right?
Yeah.
Who started college, didn't finish for one reason or another. But it's just interesting to me, Scott, how often this kind of thing has come up under Stitt's tenure, right?
Well, just appointing people that now there is no, as far as I'm aware, there is no prerequisite that you have a college degree to serve on the board for higher education. Mm-hmm. But the governor does have a habit of appointing people to positions that don't meet statutorily required, that don't have the statutorily required credentials for that position, which is interesting. Like, does no one tell him, or does he just ignore that mm-hmm. because he thinks he's allowed to ignore it? It does. It is. appointing people that either don't have legally required credentials or have no experience that's relevant to the position to which they're being appointed does seem to be a habit.
Yes. Well, and it's worth noting, as the Tulsa World did, that the State Ethics Commission, their data indicates that Dustin Hillary, his family, and their company, Hillary Communications, have contributed collectively at least $325,000 to candidates. Most, not all, but most have been Republicans for state office and to political action committees, PACs, since 2015. So in the last 8 years, right? Yeah. That includes $13,100 to Stitt's re-election campaign for this year, like his current campaign. The FEC, the Federal Election Commission, lists an additional $142,300 in contributions from Dustin Hillary since 2008. U.S. Senator James Langford, U.S. Rep. Tom Kolb, Stephanie Bice, Mark Wayne Mullen, each received in excess of $20,000 from Hillary. Like, if that's not pay to play, I don't know what is.
I mean, it seems suspicious.
Scott,
it seems suspicious.
You're a doctor. I don't know your household finances intimately well, but I'm going to guess that you probably don't have an extra $13,000 sitting around to give to a gubernatorial candidate this year.
No.
Much less, you could not have afforded $325,000.
We have not donated $500,000 to political candidates since 2008.
That's bananas.
Or ever.
Now, you can split hairs and say, well, it's not all him, it's some of his company and his family, but like that's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
It is insane. And
it's a nice house.
In some ways, you got to wonder if he feels upset that all he got was appointed to some board overseeing higher ed.
Maybe.
It's not a paid position, right?
Right.
What does he get out of it? Like, that's why it's one of those things where it's like, okay, but what would you say you do here? You provide guidance?
You raise an excellent point.
And it's, I would question. I'm not questioning that he has something to contribute, but does he have the most to contribute out of all possible candidates for that position?
Right. No, I mean, I think reasonable questions, and it's certainly makes you think of nepotism. It's kind of.
I do think of nepotism. Yes.
Certainly calls to mind nepotism. I had not looked into. I hadn't read that article. I didn't know about his donations until you mentioned that just now. That's interesting. I will say we got to go here in a second. One other thing I wanted to highlight this week, as many folks who listen to the pod, I'm sure are well aware. Is he technically former at this point? Oklahoma County Commissioner Kevin Calvey, or is he still
current?
So, is running for DA to replace David Prater.
Right.
As of this week, he has a Democratic opponent. Vicky Behenna, who's from Edmond, a former federal prosecutor. She was on the team that got the death penalty for Timothy McVeigh. She officially announced this week that she is running for. Actually, maybe she hasn't. She's going to announce this coming week. Her official announcement will be on Wednesday. But she has worked as a prosecutor. She's worked worked as a defense attorney, and is running for DA. She, I think, could be a formidable candidate against Kevin Calvey.
Yeah, and from what I've heard, she's got some good interest and energy behind her. So it'll be interesting, right? Like Oklahoma County, I think it's fairly purple, right? So it is certainly possible, but we'll have to see how it goes. That's interesting. As we wind down, I wanted to kind of just click back and reference the issue of corruption. There's a new effort underway to help, I think, promote not corruption. right? Like to promote clean,
Anti-corruption.
yeah, clean candidates. You can go to cleanupoklahoma.org and sign a pledge there. And that pledge is basically to, I think Clean Up Oklahoma is a new like civic action group from what I've, deduced from their stuff. I'm trying to find out who's, behind it and how we can help out. But basically it's saying that, money and influence should not shape our state's capital agenda, right? It should be the needs of everyday Oklahomans and our children. Even when politicians are caught red-handed misusing our tax dollars, they refuse to accept responsibility, and most of the time they get away with it. Clean Up Oklahoma has a 2-word response to that: no more. So there's that. So I'll be real interested to see how this develops. Their logo has a mop, which I think is interesting, like just a good visual, right, for mopping up our state. So if you're interested in, Indian corruption, check out cleanupoklahoma.org. And I think with that then brings us to the end of the episode. Scott, thanks for being here.
Thanks, man.
Listeners, thank you for being here as well. It's always good to spend a little time with you in the afternoon. As we say most every week, remember that decisions are made by those who show up. We hope that you will find a way to show up for yourself, for your loved ones, for your neighbors, and for this fair state. As we roll into the end of the legislative session, you need to be aware that we're going to be talking more and more about some of these issues and how they affect our state and what the conversations are about them as we head into the electoral season. We've got some events that we're talking about planning, everything from happy hours and meetups to maybe an election night show, which we did 4 years ago.
So much fun.
It was a lot of fun. So, mark your calendars for all the appropriate election days, and we'll see you out there. Have a good week.